All right, well, we're recording our Zoom call here for the benefit of ourselves, and we want to review it at some time, but especially for those who stumble upon on our YouTube page. We have a lot of videos up there now since we're producing them every week. They're shorter, but shorter often better in many ways. So it's November 8th, and we'll call this little presentation, "We'll See." And I think that's a good phrase, a good reaction to the events of this past week, which are apparently still playing out to some degree, but that's always what we can say to things that are happening and to the expected changes that we are going to look forward to. Well, state-church separation is something that is of great interest to us and has been for a long time. And of course, we do want to keep state and church absolutely separate. Because there is a problem with religion and politics being combined. The whole history of religion and politics is a huge subject. And as we know, Christianity wiggled its way into things under Constantine. Nobody hardly ever talks about why that happened. We do know a lot about how it happened, but Constantine needed some kind of ideology to knit together his empire, because the Roman legions were no longer able to just march in somewhere and completely take things over by force. And as we know, the Roman Empire fell apart not too long after Constantine. It did pretty well up until his death. But once you had religion and politics cooperating, and especially as I think originally, clearly Constantine was the emperor, and he was not really a zealot, but he used religion in order to cement and advance his political goals. But once the two things were involved, of course, then there got to be tension between the two. Religion and religious leaders trying to exert political control, as well as the political leaders trying to use religious ideology to defend and support their own activities. Just a fascinating subject, really, and a lot of times we don't really think about all the ins and outs of it. We just know we don't want the two things combined, but to some degree, they're just going to be combined. Why is that? Because there are all these religious questions, and we put up a lot of them, I think, in the past, about many of them over the years. One big religious question that, there are lots of passages having to do with this in the Bible and a lot of other so-called holy books. How are we to get along with each other? That is really a central question of human existence. Certainly far more important than does God exist and these kinds of silly supernatural kinds of things. How are we to get along with each other? So we'll talk a little bit about that today, and of course we'll continue to talk about this in the future. I'll ask anybody who doesn't have their mic muted to go ahead and do that, and that way you can cough and sneeze and have your dog bark and not, you know who you are. So here's been the central question, of course: who should rule? Because this whole question of how we're to get along with each other, and when it boils down to politics, has always preoccupied people's minds really for thousands of years. People have tried to figure out who should rule, and you see it implicitly in the Bible. Certainly Jesus never talked about the Republic of Heaven. He always talked about the kingdom of heaven, and that's really the way they knew how to do things back then. So the question, who should rule, was answered by Plato, perhaps the really serious and involved answer in his book, The Republic. His answer was simple and naive. This is a quote from Karl Popper, perhaps one of the greatest, if not the greatest philosopher of the 20th century. Bertrand Russell is up there too. Popper pointed out that Plato answered the question by saying that the best should rule. If possible, the best of all, meaning one benevolent tyrant, but of course he's a benevolent ruler, so not going to be a tyrant. And the next best place would be the best few, an aristocracy, not the evil version of an aristocracy or an oligarchy, but certainly Plato said that the many, the rabble, the demos should not be ruling, not in charge, and just decide things. And I think even the founding fathers of the United States were well aware of the dangers of mob rule. And that's one of the reasons why they set the terms for members of the House of Representatives to every 2 years, because they thought if they gave them longer terms, that mob rule would get out of control. At least the mob's mood changes a lot. And we see that with shifts in the Congress, especially the House of Representatives, all the time. Popper pointed out, by the time of Karl Marx, the political questions were still dominated by this Platonic problem of who should rule. Marx looked at it, of course, from the point of whether it should be the workers or the capitalists. And it was not too far along at that time, or around the same time, that anarchists also came up, and they were basically people that said nobody should rule. That sounds like a pretty good answer. If you can't answer the question of who should rule, maybe no one should rule. And as Popper said, one can sympathize with the unsuccessful attempt by the anarchists to get away from that old problem of who should rule. Popper went on to say, and this, by the way, is from an article from The Economist on democracy. You can look it up online. It's a very interesting article. He deals with all kinds of things. He also recommends a two-party system. Has a lot of detailed things to say, but this is also from that article, and where Popper pointed out that the question is, how can we best avoid situations in which a bad ruler causes too much harm? When we say that the best solution known to us is a constitution that allows a majority vote to dismiss the government, then we do not say the majority vote will always be right, or even say that it will usually be right. We only say that this very imperfect way of doing things is the best so far invented. And he reminds us, and I've always loved this Winston Churchill quote, that democracy, of course, is the worst form of government, except all the rest. Very, very kind of wise thing. I think that many things contained in this passage, and by the way, many of these ideas originally were presented by Popper in his famous work, Open Society and Its Enemies, that he wrote during World War II while he was in New Zealand. If you've not read that book, that should definitely be on your bookshelf, along with, I think I've previously mentioned, John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. Certainly relates to all the political things that we're always going through. But the whole idea here, of course, is to kind of look at things a little bit the opposite way. Instead of saying, well, how can we construct government to do things? How can we construct government to not do bad things? And that's very much in line with Karl Popper's position when it comes to the philosophy of science, that we can never really verify things. We can't really be sure that anything is true, but we can be very confident when things are not true, because things can be falsified, it seems like. Now, we can get into the ins and outs of that, and there's lots of ins and outs involved in it, because falsification is kind of a, that could be falsified too. But this idea of government, to get rid of the question of avoiding the question of who should rule, I think is really critical. Elsewhere, he said it this way, very succinctly, I thought, the question is not who should rule or who is to have power, but how much should be granted to the government, or more precisely, how can we develop our political institutions in such a manner that even incompetent and dishonest rulers cannot do too much harm? Of course, who is competent and who is dishonest, that is always a matter of opinion. People will always disagree about that, but again, the central question is, the fundamental problem is, how do you stop the government from behaving arbitrarily and abusively? How do you control and tame that? And it's interesting that this is a question that also was considered and really puzzled over, and a great deal of thought given by the founders. Here's James Madison. There's not too many other countries that were started from scratch as the United States was. If you want to start over again now, you first have to burn everything into the ground and then start anew. And that just doesn't seem like a very procedure to burn everything to the ground. And elsewhere, Popper does talk about the hazards of doing that he is really, as he called it, a meliorist, looking for things to improve. But here's what James Madison pointed out. If men were angels, this is a famous passage from The Federalist, if men were angels, no government would be necessary, right? Because we could all govern ourselves properly. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on the government would be necessary. So the great difficulty, of course, as he points out, lies in your need to enable the government to control the governed, in other words, to function as a government, but also oblige the government to control itself. And of course, we rely on things like the Bill of Rights. We think about that. We think of the tripartite nature of government, but we don't think of a lot of other things like the division between the federal and the state levels. We know that that was abused, certainly, that the southern states said, oh, we want to go our own way. We want to have slavery and we shouldn't be told otherwise. So there has to be a balance, of course, but there still is something to be said for local control. And of course, a famous quotation of Thomas Jefferson runs to the effect that the closer the government is to the people, the better it is. This is an interesting quote, I think, from Barack Obama, and it certainly applies to our present situation with the elections just having finished. And I think every situation, every day, he said, and I don't think he was original with this, but the idea, he said it very well. I don't think things are ever as good as they say, or ever as bad as they say. Very kind of Zen Buddhist. I think Elva would agree with me, since that's something she's looked into. Things are never as good as they say and never as bad as they say. What is the alternative after all? Let's keep in mind that too much happiness, be too elated. Oh, our guy won office, or our bill passed, or something happened in my life. Too much happiness leads to gullibility and risk taking, because you think, oh, I'm bulletproof. Now everything's wonderful. We can look away. We can stop trashing the president, for example. We can just slobber all over him and think that everything's wonderful. No, there's danger in that. But on the other hand, there's danger in too much unhappiness, because that leads to suspicion and fear and the kind of conspiracy theorists and things like that that we are all too familiar with. It's really to a kind of a bipolar society of people swinging from one extreme to the other. And I think it's useful to ask, of that, who benefits? Well, the people that benefit primarily are the people that need your clicks on the internet, since everything is going to the internet. People who are trying to sell you something, people who are trying to get you to believe something in order to promote their agenda. So this is a good religious principle, certainly very kind of Zen. And I'm going to show a short clip now. This is where the title of today's presentation comes from, We'll See. Let me just set this up. This is from a movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's about how a congressman got increased funding for support of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan back in the day when the Russians were trying to get control of that country. So they're having a party at the end of the movie because they succeeded in increasing funding and really causing the Russians a lot of trouble there and driving them out of the country. And this is at the party that they're having to celebrate their great accomplishment.
It's traditional to make a gesture towards the vanquished. It's your honor.
Okay. Well, here's to you, you motherfuckers.
Soviet military intervention in other countries is now over.
We can't see the video.
Well, I told you.
Hold on a second. I don't know why you're not seeing that. Let me back it up and do, I think I have to switch the screen share to that. I don't know why I just didn't, well, I guess because of how Zoom works. Let me try once more. Stop share. Share screen again. All right. Can you all see that now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So somehow it got down to the back. I want to go back to the beginning.
Hey, it's traditional to make a gesture towards the vanquished. It's your honor.
Okay. Well, here's to you, you motherfuckers.
The era of Soviet military intervention in other countries is now over.
Well, I told you.
Told me what?
All we had to do, shoot down the helicopters.
Listen, not for nothing, but do you know the story about the Zen master and the little boy?
Oh, some from Nitsa, the Greek witch of Aqualippa, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a little boy, on his 14th birthday, he gets a horse. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful, the boy got a horse. And the Zen master says, we'll see. 2 years later, the boy falls off the horse, breaks his leg, and everybody in the village says, how terrible. And the Zen master says, we'll see. And a war breaks out, and all the young men have to go off and fight, except the boy can't because his leg's all messed up. And everybody in the village says, how wonderful.
Now, the Zen master said, we'll see.
So you get it.
No, because I'm stupid.
You're not stupid. You're just in Congress.
Send them money.
Start with the roads, move on to the schools, factories,
Now it's a part.
restock the birds, give them a job.
I'm trying.
Yeah, well, try
I'm
harder.
fine for every dollar.
Yeah,
I took you from 5 million to $1 billion. I broke the ice of the thing in the Milan. I got a Democratic cop in lockstep behind a Republican president.
Well, that's not good enough because I'm going to hand you a code word class at NIE right now, and it's going to tell you that the crazies have started rolling in the camera like it's a fucking bathtub turn.
Jesus, Gus, you could depress a bride on the way. Hey,
Listen to what I'm telling you.
you did a hell of a job for the son of a soda pop maker.
We'll see. Says this next.
So,
Did you all get the part about how the era of Soviet intervention in other countries is now ended? Yeah, wasn't really ended, was it? Things went on. So remember what the Zen master said. We'll see. And remember too that religion is your total reaction upon life. Now, there's a whole lot of ins and outs to this too. We're going to have to come back and talk about state-church separation means or could mean if religion is not just about supernaturalism, but it's about your total reaction upon life. This goes back to originalism with the Constitution and things of the sort. And of course, as we know, the religious crazies who accuse evolution of being a religion and so on and so forth. So this is something that will have to be addressed, but that's just the way things are, because what did the Zen master say? He said, we'll see. I certainly like to continue to get some contributions from you all about your favorite ideas, your favorite quotes, things that we would expand upon and discuss at our get-togethers, at our services. This is kind of what we do. Remember, all of literature, all of what humans produce, what Karl Popper called, I think, World 3, the ideas and things as they are committed to permanent form, is our holy scriptures. November 8th, just a few things I would bring up. For 1847, that's when Bram Stoker was born. Bram Stoker was the guy that created the character Count Dracula. Just a stock horror film, but lots of philosophical ideas and notions in there, just as with Frankenstein. Frankenstein and Dracula being probably two of our most enduring tropes. The werewolf is in there too, but on this day, 1847, Bram Stoker was born. And in 1895, something very significant. Wilhelm Röntgen did X-rays. He was fooling around with electric tubes and discharge devices and discovered x-rays, which of course now allow us to do CT scans, do all kinds of quality control for material science. It's just had and we even do x-ray astronomy. Just absolutely opened up a whole new world that we covered this part of the electromagnetic spectrum and realized that we don't see everything. 1901, believe it or not, there were riots in Greece over a Gospels translation into Demotic Greek. I'm not really sure about the different forms of Greek because the original New Testament was written in Greek, but at any rate, we think that only the religious Muslim crazies who riot over things like that, but here in 1901, only a little more than 100 years ago, there were riots in Greece over this gospel translation. And of course, November 8th being one of the days in November that could be an election day. These first few days of November, always you can look back and see that different presidents were elected on this day. 1960, JFK was elected U.S. president. And in, forget for now, that George H.W. Bush, he was elected president on this day. I believe it was 1988 then. And 4 years ago, November 8th, that was when Donald Trump was elected president. So it's interesting to look back and makes us about past years and how everybody was all upset about various things that they're still upset about now. Like in 1960, there was all kinds of stuff about voter fraud and so on and so forth. Richard Nixon decided not to pursue it, but it doesn't look like our current president is going to take that tack, at least not right away.
Well, it's kind of an artificial date, isn't it, Tim? I mean, because when you say elected,
yes, of course.
That's when the media called it.
Well, of course, that's when the elections happen, but you're right. The Electoral College is a complex process, and so the president is not formally elected. But I think under our current system, it is really when they are elected, even though they're not when it's called. Well, here are our principles, our church. This is our doctrines and dogma. You cannot disagree with this and be a free thinker. That reason is paramount, that enjoy life and appreciating it, not the same things, are key to our whole attitude, our total reaction upon life, and especially love, because, and that's the keystone. You can't reason, you can't enjoy, you can't appreciate unless you do attach meaning and purpose and value to various things in life. It doesn't all have to be the same thing. You don't have to have the same values, meaning, purpose that I do, although I think many of these things we do share. I shortened up the rules about political subjects when we're talking about that, which we may do today, to keep things dispassionate and academic, focused on public policy, laws, not personalities. Recognize that facts are often in dispute, and ideological differences do not make for productive discussion. And finally, of course, to respect them. You don't need to respect their ideas, that's for sure, but to respect the people. We all come at things from a different perspective, and so we don't all get to the same place and are not at the same place at the same time. A quote from Jonathan Haidt, which I put before, just highlighting the key hits here. If you want to change someone's mind, and you're not going to do it overnight, usually it takes time, you need to see things from that person's angle, which they didn't get to where they're at either overnight, usually. And that empathy is an antidote to righteousness, or the idea that I'm right and you're wrong. Finally, free thought is not free. I so much appreciate those of you who've gone to our Facebook page and clicked our PayPal link to go and make donations. And some of you have sent checks as well. Merlin, I will definitely look at yours, because we do want to have resources to promote your message, to do the things together that we cannot do on our own, and to keep all of you from burning in heck. I don't want any of you to be darned to heck. I think about that all the time. It troubles me so much to think that any of us could be darned to heck. But really, it's about promoting our values, the values we share, and demonstrating our commitment to be the future that we wish to see, to light that candle in the dark and not just rail against the darkness. And then we'll move on to question and discussion. And before doing so, reminder that those watching on YouTube, should ring the bell, click for notifications, like us on our Facebook page, and otherwise support us and let us know your ideas. We're very much interested in that. So with that, we will conclude the YouTube video and on to our discussion amongst ourselves.